A lone cargo pilot crashes on a forbidden planet feared across the galaxy, home to a creature so deadly it's whispered about in every spacer bar and flight school. But instead of a brutal end, one act of kindness sparks a bond that defies everything we thought we knew about monsters. This isn't just a survival story. It's the beginning of a friendship that could change the universe forever. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and show a big thumbs up by liking the video. Now, let's jump into the story. Nolan Reyes was not having a good day. In fact, it was probably the worst one of his life. His cargo ship, the Starling Echo, was falling fast toward the surface of a planet called Duskfall Ridge, and no amount of button pressing or angry muttering was going to stop it. Smoke poured into the cockpit. Alarms screamed from every panel, and the ship trembled with each passing second. The stars outspun wildly as the planet grew larger in the front window, a dusty brown world dotted with jagged cliffs and craters. Nolan gritted his teeth and slammed both hands onto the controls. "Come on, girl," he said, as if the ship could hear him. "Just give me one more minute." But the ship didn't listen. With a violent shudder and a screech of metal, the Starling Echo hit the ground hard. Nolan's body jerked forward, his head smacking against the console before the emergency restraints yanked him back. The sound of tearing metal and cracking stone filled the air. Then silence. For a few seconds, he couldn't move. His vision swam, his ears rang, and the scent of burnt wires made his stomach turn. Slowly, he opened one eye, then the other. He was still breathing, still conscious, and nothing seemed to be broken, though he was sure his ribs would argue otherwise tomorrow. He unstrapped himself and pushed the cockpit door open. A rush of dry, dusty air hit his face. He climbed out of the wreckage and stepped onto the planet's surface. The sky above was tinted orange, like the light of an endless sunset. Two small suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the cracked ground. Broken towers, twisted pipes, and old mining equipment stretched into the distance. The place looked like the ghost of a forgotten colony. In fact, it was a forgotten colony. He remembered reading about Duskfall Ridge on old pilot forums once. A mining world rich with rare minerals. Now a cursed graveyard where ships went missing and no one returned. The rumors all pointed to one thing: the Thirek. Nolan had heard the stories. Every pilot had. Giant beasts that walked like men, but moved like shadows. Creatures wrapped in natural armor, strong enough to punch through ship hulls. They were silent, unstoppable, and absolutely terrifying. The mining colony had been abandoned overnight after the first Thirek attack. Since then, Duskfall Ridge had become a no-go zone. Only desperate captains, or those running from something worse, dared to land here. Nolan, sadly, had just been unlucky. A sudden meteor storm shredded half his ship's systems before he could even react. The emergency landing was his only choice. He circled the wreckage, checking the damage. The main engine casing had split open like a cracked egg, and thick black fluid pooled underneath. Several components were either missing or completely melted. Nolan sighed and rubbed his hands over his face. "Well, guess I'm not leaving anytime soon," he muttered. He grabbed his emergency rations, his old tool bag, and a flashlight from the supply locker. 3 days of food. That was all he had. The first ruined building he entered had nothing but shattered screens and a floor full of dust. The second one held twisted metal racks and a broken drone. In the third building, buried beneath a collapsed ceiling, he found a pile of engine parts. Some looked ancient, but a few seemed usable. He began digging through the mess, coughing as clouds of dust rose around him. As he reached for a heavy control valve, a sound stopped him cold. It was low, deep, almost like a growl mixed with a rumble. He froze. He knew that sound. He'd heard it once in a training video, meant to scare rookie pilots into following safety laws. The hunting call of a Thirek. Nolan's heart pounded in his chest. He slowly turned his head toward the buildings. Dark entrance. There, just beyond the broken doorway, stood a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. The Thirek was massive, easily twice Nolan's height. Its skin looked like it had been forged from dark stone, each plate of armor shifting as it moved. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Clawed hands hung at its sides, long and sharp enough to slice through steel. But it didn't move forward, it just stood there, breathing slowly, staring at him. Nolan's hand reached for the sidearm on his belt. His fingers wrapped around the grip of his plasma pistol, but he didn't lift it. The Thirek was too big. A gun like his wouldn't even leave a scratch. He tried not to tremble as he looked closer. Something was wrong. The Thirek was thin. Too thin. Its armored plates didn't fit properly, and its movements were sluggish. Its ribs showed through the gaps in its frame. And its eyes, though strange. Glowing eyes weren't wild or angry. They were tired. Nolan's mind flashed back to his childhood. He remembered a dog his grandmother used to feed behind their apartment building. It had been skinny, scared, and nearly wild at first. But she'd fed it every day. Until one day, it let her pet it. And after that, it never left her side. His hand dropped from his weapon. He reached into his bag and pulled out a protein bar. It was nothing fancy, just dried soy, paste, and vitamins, but it might be enough. He unwrapped it slowly and held it. Out in front of him. "You hungry, big guy?" he said, his voice shaking. Then he tossed it gently across the floor. The Thirek's head tilted slightly. It looked at Nolan, then at the food. Then it stepped forward, and Nolan did not run. The Thirek moved with slow, careful steps, like it didn't want to startle Nolan. Its heavy feet crunched softly against the debris-strewn floor. Nolan's eyes stayed locked on the creature, his heart beating so loud he was sure the Thirek could hear it. It reached the protein bar he had thrown and crouched down. For a moment, it just stared at it, then gave a short sniff. Its claws, sharp, curved, and terrifying, picked up the small piece of food with surprising gentleness. Then it ate, wrapper and all, making low, chewing sounds that echoed around the empty building. Nolan didn't breathe. He stood perfectly still, afraid even the smallest movement might change the creature's mind. But after a few seconds, the Thirek looked up again. Its glowing eyes met his, and for the first time, there was something in them that wasn't hunger or violence. It was curiosity. Then it made a low, soft sound. Not a growl, not a threat. Something quieter, sadder. Nolan swallowed. He reached into his bag again and pulled out another protein bar. He unwrapped this one before gently setting it on the floor, then stepped back. The Thirek didn't move until he was clear. Then it approached, picked up the second bar, and ate. It even slower than the first. Nolan couldn't believe what he was seeing. The galaxy's most feared beast was eating energy bars like a shy dog. He sat down slowly, keeping his eyes on the creature. "I'm gonna call you Bray," he said, under his breath. "Seems better than calling you it." Bray didn't react to the name. It simply stood there after finishing its food, watching Nolan with those dim, thoughtful eyes. Then, without a sound, it turned and walked out of the building, vanishing into the ruins like a shadow melting into the fog. Nolan waited a full minute before exhaling. He didn't know what had just happened, but it felt important. Maybe even the start of something bigger. Back at the wrecked ship, Nolan sat on the ramp, staring at the orange sky. He still had no radio contact, no chance of repair without more parts. And now, he'd shared food with the very creature that had scared entire colonies into fleeing. He shook his head. "I must be losing it," he said aloud. That night, sleep didn't come easy. He kept hearing distant thumps and scraping sounds in the dark. Every time he tensed, reaching for the plasma pistol under his pillow. But nothing attacked, nothing growled. Morning arrived in warm streaks of sunlight and silence. Nolan ate one of his last food, bars, and began the slow walk back to the ruins. He needed more parts, especially wiring and a working fuel converter. His mind kept drifting back to Bray. He wasn't sure if he wanted to see the creature again. But some small part of him hoped he would. Hours passed as Nolan searched through. More abandoned structures. He found 2 usable power couplings and a mostly intact drive relay. Not great, but better than nothing. While pulling a rusted tool rack off the wall, he heard something behind him. He turned quickly, pistol raised, but it was Bray. The Thirak stood in the doorway again, but this time it carried something. In its claws was a thick metal rod, slightly bent, but clearly a ship-grade component. Bray stepped into the room and gently placed the rod on the ground near Nolan. Then it backed away, as if waiting for approval. Nolan blinked. "You brought this for me?" Bray made a soft rumble in reply. Nolan slowly lowered his pistol. He walked over to the part and examined it. It wasn't just any metal rod, it was a stabilizer shaft. He needed one exactly like it to support the engine frame. Somehow, Bray had known. He looked up at the creature. "Thanks," he said, his voice quiet. "I mean it." He didn't know what the Thirak understood, but something passed between them in that moment: recognition, perhaps even trust. Nolan reached into his bag and handed Bray another food bar. This time, he didn't throw it. He held it out, arm trembling slightly. Bray stepped closer, slow as ever, and took it gently from his hand. Its claws brushed Nolan's fingers, cold and hard like stone, but its grip was careful, almost polite. Over the next 2 days, the strange partnership continued. Each morning, Bray would appear near the ship, always with some useful part or tool. Each time, Nolan would offer food, sometimes speaking to the creature in a soft voice. He knew it probably didn't understand the words, but it seemed to understand the tone. Bray was changing too. Its armor started to look tighter, more balanced. It moved with more energy, less sluggishness. Nolan watched the transformation with awe. This creature had once been the reason no one came near Duskfall Ridge. Now it was. His only ally. One morning, Nolan tried something new. Instead of holding out the bar, he took a step toward Bray and extended it slowly. Bray hesitated, then leaned in, gently taking it directly from his hand. Nolan smiled. "That's better," he said. "You're starting to trust me." He took a risk that day and reached out further, placing his hand on Bray's forearm. The skin felt like rough stone, ridged and cool. Bray didn't pull away. Instead, it made a soft sound again, the same one it had made the first time Nolan had fed it. That night, as they sat quietly beside the ship under the twin suns, Nolan looked over at his strange companion. "You know," he said, "maybe you were never the monster everyone said you were. Maybe you were just hungry." Bray looked at him, and for the first time, Nolan thought he saw something in those glowing eyes that went beyond instinct, something that looked a lot like understanding. Asterisk. Nolan's ship looked more like a half-fixed junkyard than a working spacecraft, but little by little, with Bray's help, it was coming back to life. Every morning, the massive creature showed up with a new part, sometimes a cracked fuel pump, sometimes a dented control module, and each time it was exactly what Nolan needed. He didn't know how Bray knew what to bring, but it was like the beast could read his mind, or at least understand his gestures and muttered complaints as he worked. Bray was more than helpful now. He was involved. When Nolan struggled to hold a heavy part in place, Bray would silently step in and support it without being asked. When bolts rolled out of reach, Bray would hand them back with his enormous claws, careful not to crush them. Nolan began talking out loud more, even though Bray never answered. It felt natural, like chatting with an old friend. "That wire's going to be a pain," he'd say, and Bray would nudge the wire closer. It was strange, yes, and maybe even impossible, but Nolan didn't question it anymore. He just accepted it. Then, 3 days after Bray had brought the last piece Nolan needed to repair the engine, a ship came down from the sky. It wasn't a rescue ship, not unless rescue ships came with sensor jammers and stealth tech. Nolan was standing outside the Starling Echo, wiping grease from his fingers, when he saw the small, sharp-looking vessel descend just beyond the ruins. He ducked into cover immediately. Something about that ship screamed trouble. Minutes later, a voice called out through the ruins. "Anyone alive out here?" It was casual, friendly even, but Nolan didn't move. He waited, crouched behind a half-buried mining rig. Then he saw her. A woman, maybe in her 30s, dressed in a worn flight suit and carrying a long-range scanner. She wasn't armed. At least, not openly. Nolan stepped out. "I'm here," he said cautiously. "Names." "Nolan Reyes." The woman lowered her scanner and smiled. "Kira Denton. I'm a field researcher. Been hearing stories about someone surviving on Duskfall Ridge. Stories that involved a very large friend." Nolan narrowed his eyes. "And what exactly are you looking for, Kira?" "Information," she replied. "And maybe the truth. The Council thinks Thirax are just killing machines. But a few sensor readings said otherwise. I had to see for myself." As if on cue, Bray appeared from the shadows, towering over both of them. Kira stiffened, her smile fading slightly. But she didn't run. She just stared wide-eyed as Bray calmly approached and stopped beside Nolan, making a quiet, deep sound. "He trusts you," Kira whispered. "That's incredible." Nolan gave a small nod. "He saved me, helped me fix the ship, brought me food in his own way." "May I observe?" she asked, eyes still fixed on Bray. "No cages. No labs, just observation." Against his better judgment, Nolan agreed. For the next few days, Kira camped near the ship. She took notes, filmed videos, and whispered into her recorder as Bray moved and worked with Nolan. She never got too close. But Bray tolerated her presence, even watched her from time to time. Things were going well, until the bounty hunter arrived. His name was Rillo Maddox, and he wasn't subtle. His ship thundered into orbit, painted with battle marks and glowing blue engines. Before Nolan could even react, Maddox stumped out, armor clanking, blaster at his side. "I've got orders," Maddox said with a grin. "Big ones, turns out. Someone placed a price on Thirac heads. And yours?" He pointed at Bray. "Is worth a fortune." Nolan stepped between them. "He's not for sale." Maddox raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't asking." Before Nolan could draw his weapon, Bray moved, not to attack, but to protect. The giant creature stepped forward, placing himself directly between Maddox and Nolan. His posture was calm, but his claws flexed. His eyes glowed with quiet warning. "Whoa there," Maddox said, taking a step back. "Fine, I'll go. But this won't be the last offer." He left, but Nolan knew others would come. Later that evening, Nolan sat beside Bray and watched the sun set over the jagged hills. "You don't belong here," he said softly. "You helped me, Bray. You saved me. I don't want to leave you behind." Bray made a sound, low and steady. Then he stood and walked to the cargo bay. Nolan followed. The large creature stared at the empty interior, then back at him. "You want to come?" Nolan asked. Bray tilted his head as if waiting. The decision felt sudden, and yet entirely right. Nolan worked through the night, clearing space, reinforcing the floor, and connecting the environmental controls to make sure Bray could breathe comfortably during the flight. By morning, he stood at the edge of the ramp, looking at Bray. "Well?" he asked. "Room for one more?" Bray stepped inside without hesitation. The starling echo lifted off slowly from the planet that had tried to kill Nolan and ended up changing his life. As the ship climbed into the stars, Bray stood beside the window, staring down at Duskfall Ridge. Nolan glanced back from the pilot's seat. "Guess we're partners now," he said. Bray made a soft sound, one Nolan had come to think of as a sign of calm. A sign of trust. And then, for the first time in a long time, Nolan Reyes smiled. The starling echo floated gently through space, leaving the dusty world of Duskfall Ridge far behind. Inside the ship, Nolan Reyes sat at the control panel, checking readings and flight paths, while Bray, the once feared Thirek, stood near the rear observation window, silently watching the stars. It had only been 2 days since they left the planet, but already everything felt different. Nolan wasn't just a stranded pilot anymore, and Bray wasn't just a beast hiding in the shadows. They were something else now, something more. There. First stop was Freehold Station, a small trading post orbiting a quiet moon. Nolan needed fuel, food, and a few replacement parts. He kept Bray hidden in the cargo bay, not because he didn't trust him, but because he didn't trust other people. As soon as he docked, he saw curious eyes, nervous glances, whispers spreading faster than fuel fumes. Somehow, word had gotten out that a Thirek had left Duskfall alive, with a human. Nolan could feel the questions waiting behind every stare. He moved quickly through the station, making his trades and avoiding conversations. When he returned to the Echo, Bray greeted him with a low rumble and a tilt of the head. "Don't worry," Nolan said. No one tried to break in. Bray made a softer noise this time, something close to the comforting sound he'd used back on the planet. Nolan leaned against the wall and sighed. "We're going to need a plan." That plan arrived sooner than he expected. A message blinked on his console. It was from a colony called Emberline, located deep in a lawless stretch of space. They needed emergency supplies, medical kits, clean water units, food packs, and fast. Pirates had been raiding their shipments. No other traders were willing to make the trip. Nolan looked at the map. The route passed through a dangerous cluster of asteroid fields and pirate-controlled territory. Suicide for a lone freighter. But Nolan wasn't exactly alone anymore. He glanced at Bray, who was watching him calmly from across the room. "What do you think?" he asked. "Want to play hero?" Bray blinked slowly, then tapped a thick claw against the console, right on the coordinates. Nolan chuckled. "All right, let's save some people." The journey to Emberline took 2 days. The moment they reached the final approach, pirate ships emerged from behind drifting rocks. 3 fighters, small and fast. They hailed Nolan's ship with a simple message: surrender or die. Nolan didn't answer. Instead, he opened the cargo. Bray launched into space without hesitation. His thick body twisted through the zero-gravity field with power and grace. The pirates had no idea what hit them. Bray tore through one engine with a single swing, disabled a second ship's weapons, without harming the pilot, and landed on the third with a loud clang. Nolan watched on the ship's screen as the last pirate waved a white flag literally. After that, the delivery went smoothly. The Emberline colonists greeted Nolan like a hero, thanking him again and again. But it was Bray who truly amazed them. Children peeked through the windows of the ship, whispering about the gentle giant who saved them. For the first time, Bray didn't hide. He even stood at the loading ramp as the supplies were handed off, watching quietly as the colonists worked. The story of Emberline's rescue traveled faster than any ship. Within days, Nolan was receiving messages from across the galaxy. Journalists wanted interviews. Scientists asked for data. The Galactic Council sent an official request to meet. And then came the most surprising visitor of all, Doral Wynn, a council observer and diplomat. She arrived at Nolan's next stop, stepping into the starling echo with wide eyes and cautious steps. "I've never seen a Therac up close," she said, voice trembling with excitement and fear. "At least, not one that didn't try to kill." "Me, he's not like the stories," Nolan replied. "He's not a monster." Doral spent hours speaking with Nolan, taking notes, and cautiously approaching Bray. To her surprise, Bray didn't growl or lash out. He simply watched. At one point, she offered him a piece of dried fruit. He accepted it gently and made that soft, almost grateful sound. Doral smiled. He understands kindness. Not long after, the council sent an invitation not an order to present Bray at a diplomatic summit. Nolan agreed, but with one condition. Bray wouldn't be caged or treated like a pet. He would walk beside Nolan as an equal. To his surprise, the council accepted. At the summit, Nolan stood before leaders from over 30 worlds. Cameras floated above, recording every second. Bray stood tall beside him, armored and proud, but calm. Nolan cleared his throat and spoke. "Was never supposed to be anyone important. I moved boxes between planets and prayed my ship wouldn't fall apart. But then I crashed on Duskfall Ridge. I thought I'd die there. Instead, I met someone who changed my life." He looked at Bray. "They told me he was a monster, a killer, a nightmare. But what I found was a creature who had been left behind, starving and alone. I gave him food. He gave me his trust. And together, we've helped people who had no one else." He paused, then added, "Maybe the real monsters aren't the ones we fear. Maybe they're the ones who turn away when others need help." The room was silent. Then applause began, soft at first, then louder. Bray looked around, then let out a sound that echoed like a deep drumbeat. Nolan smiled. It was the sound of hope. After the summit, something unexpected happened. Other Theracs began to appear. 1, then 2, then 7. They came in ships or were found hiding on ruined planets. All of them hungry, all of them cautious. But Bray greeted them. He spoke to them in his way, and slowly they began to trust. Nolan knew he couldn't care for them all on the Starling Echo. So, with help from the council, he started something new, a sanctuary. A place for Theracs to live safely, away from fear, and maybe even learn to live beside others. Bray helped design it. He even led the first group there himself. From cargo pilot to ambassador, Nolan had never imagined this future. But as he stood beside Bray, watching the stars rise over a peaceful new home, he realized something. Kindness had done what weapons never could. It had changed the galaxy. And the adventure was only beginning.